You are listening to the People Centric Podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do.
Hey, people-centric leaders. It's Stephanie Anderson. We're so excited to have you back for another episode of the People-centric Podcast. And today, our team is going to break down an interesting question that we got recently. So this question was brought to us about personality differences on the team and when you should or should not hire someone who has a really different personality from the rest of your team. And so I'm going to kind of frame the story here that was brought to us, and then I'll introduce who's on the call today to give us thoughts and perspectives. But here's essentially the story is we had a manager who has an awesome team, and they decided they needed to add another person to it. And so the manager went through hiring and ended up kind of singling out a candidate who had all the right skills, had a lot of the traits that they were looking for, but this person was different, is what was said. They were just different. And as we talked about that, realizing this person had a really different personality from the rest of the team. The current team is really extroverted and outgoing. They're very social and relationship focused on the team. They're high tension, which what I mean by that is these are like, you can tell they're working and they're busy because they're moving around a lot and they're talking about it a lot. And this person that they were interviewing was kind of on the other end of the spectrum of all of that, more introverted, more reserved, not as likely to just like sit and have more of those social water cooler conversations, is low tension of really honestly like more reserved. Like you could look at them and it might not look like they're accomplishing much, but they are working really hard. And so the manager made the decision to hire this person because, again, they had all the right traits and skill sets that they were looking for. But now there's tension on the team because they're starting to feel the impact of that personality difference. And so the question that kind of was posed to us was like, did I make the wrong hire? Should I not have hired this person? Because there is some conflict on the team that's happening where the current team is feeling like this person doesn't really fit, or they're working in different ways than the rest of the team does. And it's causing a little bit of conflict because now people are bringing stories to this manager. It feels a little like maybe there's some tattling happening. And the manager is kind of reflecting back to the team of like, I'm seeing good performance from this person. So I don't really have an issue if they're doing it a different way or if their approach is a little different because we're still accomplishing what needs to be accomplished, but it's uncomfortable for the team. And so wanted to bring this question to our team today, to say like, okay, so did the manager make a wrong hire, and kind of what should you think about maybe before you hire someone on your team who has a really maybe different personality or different approach? And maybe when is that a good choice? And when could that be the wrong choice? And all this to say, if you're listening to this too, and you're like, oh my God, it's me. I'm like, this isn't the first time we heard this. It was just an interesting question that was brought to our team last week. And so want to just kind of open up the floor a little bit. So first, I'm going to go to Bethany Taft on our team. Bethany is with us today. Bethany, how have you seen this happen before, and how has it played out? And kind of start us down the path of like, did she make the wrong hire?
So many questions that I would have to ask first before I know if she made the wrong hire in the situation. I think that the thing is, I would just want to acknowledge that like Culture fit and personality do matter. I do think that they matter for sure on a team. And I think that there are impacts to having somebody who is maybe a poor culture fit or they just are different than the rest of the team. And I think you just have to acknowledge those things. But they're not the only thing that matters whenever you're hiring someone, obviously. I can think of another example too, where somebody was added to a team and this person I'll say they were a good culture fit, but a different personality even. So I think there's even a difference between those two things of this person was a really good culture fit, different personality than a lot of the team. And so the way that you saw that reflected was just like how they handled their downtime. Did they want to spend their time with the rest of the team or not? And for this person, it was like, well, they just kind of like wanted to have their own space between times. But when they were together with the rest of the team, they had really good rapport and enjoyed their time together and all of that. But then the rest of that situation was that like when you started looking at the performance of that person and were they able to effectively do their job, the answer was like, well, no, they weren't. And so in that situation, the team had to be able to recognize that like, yeah, we can maybe make adjustments and make room for somebody who has a different personality than us. But what cannot be really tolerated is if they can't do the job at the end of the day. And I think that's the big factor, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and to be clear here, like, yeah, we're not talking about performance, right? It's yeah, someone has to be able to do the job and have the skills that are needed there. But Bethany, you made really an interesting distinction there that I think a lot of people have a hard time distinguishing between culture fit and someone's personality. So could you say more about that? Like, what's the difference for you that you see between like culture fit on a team and what could you mean their right culture fit versus just someone's personality?
Yeah. So when I think about culture fit, I think of somebody who is really aligned with the organization's like mission, vision, values, and the direction that they're going towards, and not something that really drives the work that they are coming in and want to do every day. And so they're thinking about like, yeah, whenever, if you're looking at two people on a team and you think that like one of them is very, introverted and one of them is very extroverted, and they would maybe handle the same situation. If they're put in a similar situation, they might handle it a little bit differently just based on their personality. But what drives them is the same goals, right? The same goals and how the organization would sort of ask them to do that based on what their mission is and what their values are as an organization. So that's kind of what I would say to differentiate it. Would you add anything to kind of that
No,
description?
I love that. I love the way you said it, and I agree. It's like culture is about alignment,
Mm-hmm.
and like are we here for the same reasons and the same purpose? We're all, if we're all in the boat, we're all rowing the same direction together, and we're all really engaged doing it. And you could do that and have very different personalities in that sense. I think what trips people up is that they start talking about like approach or how this person communicates and labeling that culture
Mm-hmm.
versus that is just how someone is communicating. And I think the other tricky part of this is that you can influence someone toward culture, and I think people can grow and learn in that. And there are some parts of your personality, like how you communicate, you can adjust, but there's other parts that like really you're probably more fixed than you think you are in your personality as a human being, and that's hard for all of us to think about or admit. And some of those things might be like being an introvert versus an extrovert, and that's one that's like I think really common for us to hear, and we'll see teams like shy away from hiring someone like if they have a whole team of introverts, they shy away from hiring an extrovert or vice versa. And realizing that's probably not something that's going to change about someone. And is that really your culture? So sometimes it's taking a critical eye to that. But no, I agreed with how you said that, Bethany, and just thinking about that. Because that kind of takes me into my next thought on this is like when we talk about personality difference and like what you can coach or can't coach, of like really looking at a role and saying like, is it really that someone to be successful in this role would have to have these specific personality traits? And for me, and I'd be curious to hear your opinion on this, I think that's where we start seeing people making what we call like unicorn role descriptions, where not only does this person have to have all of these skills, but then they also have to present those skills in this specific way. They have to talk like we talk and walk like we walk. And the reality is like, there's a certain level of that feels really good, right? If everybody on our team talks and walks and kind of operates the same way, it feels good because there's a lot of harmony, right?
Totally.
But then the other side of that is like, is that actually what's required of this position? And now have we created a role where really there's nobody outside of our team who could ever be a great fit for this? Or
Mhm.
we realize we're actually just starting to hire based on personality and we get really away from the skill sometimes. So I'm
Yeah.
curious what you've seen with that, Bethany, and what you think.
Well, I think it's really common. I mean, we probably do that too. It's like, I think
Yeah,
everybody falls
totally.
into that trap, right? Of being like, let's hire, like, you want to hire people you like, and the people that you like tend to be the people who are most similar to you in a lot of ways too. And so we start to get uncomfortable when people have a little bit of a different personality. And so I think that's really, so it's like, I think you have to be really conscious of that like that's going to be most people's tendency, and to be willing to know like what are kind of the traps for us as a team to say like, what are the things that we tend to say like, oh, I really like this person because of X, Y, and Z. And just know that like that's okay, but what are the core things in that role that you need to be looking at that's going to make somebody successful in that job? And is it really those personality traits, or is it the skill set? And then outside of that, saying like, and then are they a good culture fit? Do they believe in where we're going? Are they aligned with the organization? Are they passionate about the stuff that we're doing? And then outside of that, like if they handle this part of the job a little bit differently than I would, that's totally okay. And then what are the things that we would just need to like train people on too, for some commonalities, because it's like, no, this is the way that we need to make sure that the job is done.
Yeah. I liked kind of the extra question you added there when like evaluating a candidate of like, why did I like this about them? Because I think a lot of times when we're interviewing, and you're right, we all totally fall into this. I don't know how you don't, honestly. But to add that extra question of like, we'll often be like, oh, this is what I liked about them. But then to add that second question, like, why did I like that about them? And it's okay if the answer is because that's me and I like that, or that's my preference, or that feels aligned with my personality. That doesn't make it a wrong answer, right? But it just to be aware and to maybe like gut check yourself of maybe where are we making a personality higher and the scales are tipping a little too far in that direction. Because we've also seen that with teams too, right? Like the other side of this question is like, what if I keep hiring people who all are exactly kind of quote unquote exactly the same, right? Everyone is unique and special, and we have
Yeah.
diverse people, but of like, if I start hiring everyone who thinks the same, works the same way, does the same
Mhm.
thing, then what we know from the study of like how people work is that we start creating echo chambers
Mhm.
in that moment. And we also know that those are teams that have a lot of harmony and it feels good if you're one of those people. But we also know, again, statistically speaking, those are teams that actually accomplish less because they become they become yes people to each other and create those echo chambers. And we kind of all do it the way that we all feel like doing it versus maybe sometimes challenging ourselves to look at something a different way.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. There's been multiple teams that we've worked with where we saw hire after hire after hire of somebody who is like, they fit in great with the team. They were so much fun. They all got along super well, and it was great until it wasn't great because there was maybe an issue with like, oh, we really, really liked them. They're super fun to hang out with and I want to be friends with them. But whenever it comes down to, again, the skills for the actual job they're hired for, now we're having a little bit of issues. And so then it makes it even harder too, especially as a leader within that organization or of that team, to start having conversations about performance or giving feedback, because it's like, oh, because our whole relationship has been really about just like how connected we are and how much fun we're having and how much I like you and how similar we are. And now it's like okay, no, we actually have to have a conversation now and give some feedback and provide some accountability. And that is a lot harder in that kind of a situation when your whole focus has been on personality, and not on those other portions of hiring.
Yeah, totally. And then sometimes that's the feedback that never really comes, right? Because if we're being super honest with ourselves, and I'll say, like, I've been there before hiring people where you're like, well, I don't want to give them that feedback because actually then it's pointing a finger at how I'm working too, because our personalities are so similar. And we've just, like you said, we've built our work rapport and relationship just on that personality versus the performance and the skills level. And then it's hard for me to be honest with you about that, because then that means that there's probably other people on the team I should be holding accountable. I should be holding myself more accountable to those things because we kind of like, we see the pattern repeating. So yeah, I think that's good. So I think it's what we're kind of saying is like the first gut check is like, how much is personality actually important when hiring for this position? And are there those things that, yeah, actually, like, this would make it really, really hard for this person to be successful in that role versus like, actually, no, that's just a preference. It's not a requirement or something that we can really to maybe ask of or demand of for this person.
Yeah, yeah. And I was thinking about sort of the story that you shared at the beginning, Stephanie, of the specific example, where, how do you then help the team if you determine, okay, I think it is a personality difference, but really like they're doing the job well. It's just a little bit harder to create connections with the rest of the team because this person is different. So how do you help the team connect with somebody who has a different personality, but's a good fit for the job?
Yeah, yeah. And that's the tough part because this is where I think it really just comes down to like you as the leader in some ways and how you're communicating with your team and how you're doing that. Because yeah, in this situation, what was happening was, again, the team was bringing stories to the manager that were criticisms of how this person was working. And the manager was hearing those and kind of reflecting back to the team, well, like, I don't, like, kind of saying like, I don't care as much about the how, but that like the what and the product, the production of the work and the quality of the work is good. And so, I think that was part of the struggle because it felt like then the team is coming and tattling. And what it's starting to feel like is that the team is trying to push this person out. And there's even like kind of a dark side to this is like, is our team kind of starting to bully this person and pick on them or nitpick how they're doing things in a way that's really not fair or kind. So I think that's something you have to kind of be aware of going in as a manager and kind of decide up front for yourself, how do I want to handle that when it happens? Because I think, there isn't the bullying is the extreme side of that, right? But we do see it happen quite commonly when this is what's happening on a team is we hired someone with a different personality, is even unintentionally, the team is excluding them or pushing them out or away from different work or projects because it just, the vibe isn't there. Right. And so like, you have to think about that as a manager when you hire this person and say, like, how am I going to reinforce that with my team that, hey, I don't need you worried about this, and to keep them focused on actually what's really important there. And so I think it is thinking through, how am I going to handle those conversations when they happen? Because again, we were talking about like teams that have a lot of harmony, feel good, but tend to accomplish less. And the other side of that is teams that have lots of different personalities or approaches tend to naturally have a little more conflict, but actually statistically they accomplish more. And so some of that is even like sharing that with the team, that like that you appreciate that this person is maybe bringing another approach or perspective to the table, that it opens up your team to new opportunities and seeing or doing things a different way. And also coaching your team on what actually needs to be brought to you. Like, what would be a concern for you to see? Because I don't think any manager out there wants their team feeling like they have to police each other's behavior. And then that's where we hear about the micromanaging and the things where managers then try to just address every concern. And then it feels like we're micromanaging. So I think it's helping your team know, like, kind of like where those boundaries are, what the lines are, and really pointing back to your values and the mission. And like, again, that personality versus culture is what is the important alignment that we have to have. And then where can we have flexibility on some of these things? And that sometimes that flexibility is where some of the magic happens, where somebody does a process differently than we've ever done it. And it's awesome. And now, is it uncomfortable? Probably, but it's awesome. And so I think you have to work with your team and you have to coach and communicate that. And even maybe thinking about having the upfront conversation with them. You don't want to like point out this person and single them out from the beginning. And so you have to be really careful how you do this, but just to even tell your team like, hey, I'm bringing this person on and I'm actually excited because I think they're going to like challenge us to think about things in other ways. And that's something that I am frankly looking forward to. And I know it's not always going to feel comfortable, but like, just know, like, this is the values are where we're going to draw the line, and the mission and why we're all here is where we're going to draw the line. But the how we do it, I want us to be more flexible on. I want us to do that. So I think there's that side of it with the team. And then, the other side of it, and I'll pause before I go there, is you do also have to be having conversations with this individual, because I also think there's coaching you can do with them to like help them just be more successful with the team, coach them on how to maybe have more of those relational conversations if they're not somebody who really values that as at work as much as the rest of the team.
Yeah, I think that's all really, really good. Yeah, part of that too, I think, is the like thinking about your training process for this employee too. So if you're bringing somebody else onto the team, or maybe they're already on your team and it's just an acknowledgement of, okay, we have this other person on our team, but I think about the way that you're training and how is that set up, and is it conducive to, am I training for personality based on one kind of personality in this role? Or knowing the sort of thou shalts of this is how the work has to be done. And then also, letting that person know where they can kind of like use their own flair and their own personality and their own way of doing things. And that's totally acceptable. I think that's really good for any team coming in, because if you're the new person coming into the team and you're sort of observing all the different personalities on the team and watching how something is being done, and you think like, wow, I am not like that other person over there, then it automatically feels kind of like a threat, because you think like, I don't know if I can be successful on this team. So it's really good and important for leaders and team members to kind of reinforce that, like, no, that's just one way that it's done on the team, but you can do it a different way. Like you don't have to mimic this person. And so So lean into your own personality and your own way of doing things and your own strengths in this way. And this is just the end goal. And so here's what we had. Here are the thou shouts, and outside of that, like that's great. So thinking about that with training, and then to kind of piggyback on like you were talking about, Stephanie, kind of coaching that person on like ways that they might connect with the team and stuff like that, that might be a little bit different or maybe a little bit hard, is also just like as a manager, facilitating spaces for your team to connect. And so like just creating more space. So maybe that's just like, do you have those regular like weekly meetings or whatever it is, where it's like creating space for everybody to participate in a way that makes the most sense for them to, and making sure everybody's voices are heard in certain aspects, and creating opportunities for them to collaborate together about the work that they're doing too. And then if there are opportunities that are sort of beyond just like work collaboration, then like creating some space for that too, where it's maybe not as natural for the different personalities on the team to kind of come together on their own, just for like the fun stuff, right? For like the team building stuff, and finding the right opportunities to do that, so that it's not forced, but it's facilitated.
Yeah, it's intentional,
It's
right? And
intentional, right?
it's intentional. And I think, we've been talking a lot about how, bringing this person onto the team can be a growth opportunity for the team. But yeah, it's also a growth opportunity for this person if you as the leader are willing to spend that intentional time with them and have those conversations. And I love that you brought up like having those like check-ins and things with this person, because that was, I think, one of the piece of advice that we ended up giving in this situation was like, hey, I think this person can really be successful, but you as the manager have to be willing to do some coaching here. You've got to be willing to do coaching with your team of like, guys, like we're not going to push somebody out, right? We're not going to like live outside of our values that way, and coaching the team and helping them understand what type of problems do you want them to bring to you? What do you want them to be concerned about? And what are the things that you're saying, hey, like I am okay with that, or it's okay for us to be flexible in that way. But then again, it's that one-on-one coaching with this person, because it is a growth opportunity for them. Like think about that person, like that's challenging for them to come to an environment and feel like they're the one that's different than everybody else, or they're in that minority space and in personality land. That's an opportunity for them too, to learn and grow. And how do I work with people who have different personalities from me? But again, I think the success point there is that you as the manager have to be willing to facilitate those conversations and make it intentional. And I think that's where I would say, like, if you are willing to think through these things, and if you're willing to do coaching as a manager, then this could be an awesome opportunity for your team to grow and see things a different way. But if you're really not, and if you're going to be honest with yourself to say like, I'm not going to put in the effort to do this, then that person probably is not a good hire, because then you're setting them up to kind of be like thrown to the wolves in that situation. And it's going to bring conflict to your team that you're not willing to kind of jump in and help resolve. And so some of this is truly actually just being honest with yourself as a manager of like, am I willing to grow and stretch myself? And is this a good time for our team to kind of go through this?
Yeah.
Or is it not? And maybe I'm not there, or our team's not there, or this would be a hard time to maybe throw a little more tension into the scenario, or just frankly, like, I'm not really willing to have those conversations.
Yeah. I think that's really good, just to acknowledge that for managers, that like, yes, this can be really successful if you are effectively managing your team. So recognizing that. And if you have been effectively managing your team, then this is probably going to be a lot easier. So don't wait till this moment to manage your team, even if they all have a similar personality. And so hopefully you're already working with your team and helping them see the strengths and abilities of everybody at the organization. And so I think that's really good. And then yeah, if you're an employee in this setting and you have somebody who is already on the team that you're like, I'm just really struggling to connect with this person because we are so different. Don't back away. Don't stop trying that of like, try to understand, try to meet them where they're at, try not to make assumptions and write stories about their work or how, how well they're doing at the job. Like try to look at it objectively to say like, are they doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, and letting your manager handle that on, partly. And then also just like coming alongside somebody and just getting to know them as best as you can, and respecting people's boundaries and their differences. And yeah, I think that it's just like, just don't write that story. Don't start assuming things about them just because they might think about it differently than you do.
Yeah, I'm so glad you took us there on like the employee side, because we've been talking a lot about like if you're a leader, if you're a manager, if you're someone that's hiring, but there is a huge part of this that is to like the individual employees. And yeah, I love what you said of don't write stories, because I think that one of the most common things we hear when this is happening on a team and there's maybe some really distinct personality differences is we'll hear the employee say something, well, this person is just obviously not doing their job, or they're just obviously
Don't
not
even
working.
care, obviously.
They obviously, yeah, they don't care. They don't want to, they obviously don't want to be friends with anybody here.
Mhm.
And, because we're consultants, we ask questions when we hear things like that. And I think the first question is like, oh, well, how do you know that? And then we usually hear a story that again is not wholly untrue or wrong, but it's where we've made some assumptions of I used the word tension earlier, which is one word we use to kind of describe ways in which people work. And like a really high tension person, and I'm one of those people, so if you've ever watched us on YouTube, like I'm moving around, I'm talking with my hands, and frankly, I'm working because I'm either talking about it or I'm like, I look like a little busy bee, like my body moves as I'm working. It's very obvious I'm working. You can compare that with, Diana on our team, for example. If you've ever watched her on these, she's more still, right? And we have shared stories on the podcast before of like difference in tension on our team and how that's played out. But somebody who is lower tension, it may not be visually obvious how busy they are. For me, and Bethany is nodding her head a lot because her desk is literally next to mine. It is visually obvious when I am working and when I am not. For low tension personalities, it's not visually obvious. Like Diana could be working on like the biggest project we've ever tried to launch ever, and she's going to look very calm, more still. She can stay in one place for a longer period of time than I can to do that. She's probably not like talking and interacting with the rest of the team as much as I would if she's working on it. And the reality is that both of those are great ways to work. But I think, again, sometimes we put way too much emphasis on what we visually observe versus what's actually happening. And so again, as the employee, I think it's to challenge yourself is when I say, well, they obviously weren't doing anything because they were just sitting there. Okay, but how do you know that they weren't accomplishing things? How do you know that? And just also realizing like it's probably not your role as the employee to be judging other employees like performance levels. And if you have a true concern that like work's not being done and things are not being accomplished or clients or patients aren't being taken care of, then that's probably a good thing to go to your manager about.
Mm-hmm.
But just because this person and I work differently is probably not a good helpful flag, right?
There was one example, and I was coaching somebody the other day that they brought this up. And so I don't want to get us in a whole other tangent necessarily, because I think I think there could be more said about this, but basically they made the distinction of they were talking about their team's productivity, and they're showing the metrics, and this person made a comment basically saying that like they want the team to know that they're judging their productivity based on what the numbers are showing, not what they are seeing from the team and how it looks like. If they're having a conversation with somebody over here, they're not worried about that as long as the metrics are showing like, hey, we're meeting our goals this week. Like, we were super productive. That's awesome. I could care less. I'm not even concerned about this side conversations or you walking around over here if we have met the goals that we have. And the reason I say I don't want it to go on a whole tangent is like that there's like dials to that too, right? Like I think it's great to have metrics and to be able to have those numbers and that to be able to show you the productivity of a person or the team. And also it should be what we were talking about before of like, you should also be having conversations with people too, to make sure that you know what's going on with them and that they are being productive and they're able to be successful in their role too. But I just thought that was a really great statement, that it was like, no, I'm not as worried about the like visual necessarily, as long as I can see that work is actually happening too. So
yeah, definitely. So I think the question of like, when should you and shouldn't you hire someone with a really different personality? It's like, well, it kind of depends, right? And a lot of it depends on if you are the manager in that situation, like how much are you willing to coach and lean in and spend time with your team to ensure that this is successful, and having those right conversations and helping your team grow and learn through these experiences. So, in this situation, I think with coming back to our story at the top, it's like, I don't think that there was a wrong hire here necessarily, but it does sound like there are opportunities to reinforce just like those big cultural pieces like values and how we would treat each other as a team, reinforcing, like Bethany, what you said, what metrics are you watching as a leader to know if someone's doing a good job, and being transparent, helping your team know the score better and how you're judging performance, and really like helping your team understand that like there's probably not just one right way to do something or one right personality match for the role. There's probably lots of different ways we could do that, again, if we're all really clear and we're all actually willing to lean in and have some of these good conversations. And again, like if you hear all that and you're like, nope, not for me, I don't want to do that, well, then maybe don't hire that person, because you don't want to set them up for failure. You don't want to create conflict on the team that you're not willing to jump in and support the team with. So I think it depends.
Yeah.
There's the final word. It depends.
Don't you love that? I feel like that's so often our message on this podcast is it depends, which I think probably drives some people crazy, but it's true. There's so many different elements, which I think in some ways it should be freeing for people in the workplace to recognize that, like, you know what, there are lots of different ways to do and think about things. And so let's just talk about the pros and cons of both. So I love that we can take those approaches with the work that we do and how we talk about these situations. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, we hope this has been helpful for you today as you listen to this topic. And if you have more questions about this, or we just described something that's happening on your team and you're like, gosh, you didn't talk about this piece of it, reach out to us and we'd love to hear from you and share some more support or advice in that space. So be sure to listen to the outro for how to get a hold of us. And if you have ideas for us, this was awesome because it was brought to us by somebody who's experiencing this. So if there's more real life scenarios that you'd love to hear our team talk about and kind of what we've seen and learning how to lead your team well, we'd love to hear that. So send us your thoughts and ideas. But thanks for being here and listening to the People Centric Podcast. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the People Centric Podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new topic. Until then, be well and